Hi, I'm Ben, welcome back to my channel. Apologies that this month's news is coming in a little bit late. Between busyness at work and a short holiday that Matt and I took to Iceland recently, which was lots of fun, we had a really nice time, things have just been getting on top of me and I've been struggling for time. But let's not waste any now and get stuck into the news right away, because there is quite a lot of it to cover. So much so that I am actually quite fearful of the amount of editing that I'm going to need to do. First up, a headline that I found really interesting, and apparently a lot of you found it interesting too, because like 3 or 4 people either emailed me or DM'd me on Instagram about this. Basically, Simon & Schuster has taken the step, in the US at least for one of their imprints, to stop asking authors and agents to source blurbs for their books. When I say blurbs in this case, I don't mean the descriptions on like the back of paperbacks or the inside flap of hardbacks. Instead, we're talking about the short quotes from critics or authors that are included to try and sell you the book or to tell you how good it is, and in which 80% of cases seem to contain the word either luminous or kaleidoscopic. The reason they're taking this step is because they say the practice creates, quote, an incestuous and unmeritocratic literary ecosystem that often rewards connections over talent. And based on the reactions I've seen from a number of authors, they seem inclined to agree and have really welcomed the change. For my money, I can see how the ask to secure big name authors for blurbs can add unnecessary pressure at a time that's probably quite scary and full of pressure anyway when you're publishing a novel, and it creates this sort of insiders-outsiders dynamic that must feel really crappy for those on the outside who don't know the right people. On the other hand, I do personally find blurbs quite useful. Like, sure, most of the time I do not believe them in the slightest, and the cherry-picked single words don't shed much light on whether the book is actually to my taste. But I do think that the choice of other authors to feature does signal what the book is being marketed as, and whether the publisher is trying to appeal to readers like me. By triangulating the authors that are featured, I can often work out like what the book is trying to be, what the tone might be like, and whether I'm interested in reading it. So I do kind of hope that blurbs don't disappear completely one day and it's just a case of the publisher being responsible for sourcing them rather than the author. This is such an interesting topic though, and I am very curious about the whole process behind the scenes, like the blurb industrial complex. So I am considering doing a full video on this. Do let me know if you would like to see that. And also tell me what you think of blurbs. Like, do you find them useful, or are they just marketing fluff that you ignore and completely filter out? Drop a comment with your thoughts. Next, another story in the series that I'm considering calling AI Destroys the Arts. Maybe that needs its own jingle. But anyway, the Authors Guild was in the news in 2023 and throughout 2024 for taking OpenAI and later Microsoft to court over copyright infringement, a case that I believe is still ongoing. They've hit the headlines again though, taking the extraordinary step to offer its 15,000 members a new sticker to put on their book covers. What is this sticker, you might be wondering? Well, it's an assertion that the book is human authored. Douglas Preston, who is an author and member of the Authors Guild Council, said, quote, "It isn't just to prevent fraud and deception, it's also a declaration of how important storytelling is to who we are as a species. And we're not going to let machines elbow us aside and pretend to be telling us stories when it's just regurgitating literary vomitus." I too fear being vomited on by AI slop, but it is so depressing that a sticker is even needed. It'll be interesting to see who, if anyone, actually uses it. I expect big name authors probably won't, unless it's some sort of stunt or they take a collective stand against AI. But it might be more useful for some smaller authors trying to cut through once the AI wave of self-published stuff begins to crest, because sadly, I think that a flood of AI written books is inevitable and in a not too distant future. If all this AI news makes you nostalgic for a time when mega corporations weren't trying to destroy art and creativity, but were just trying to screw us financially and stop us from owning anything, well, fear not, because Amazon is here to remind you of the good old days. As of the 26th of February, Amazon has removed the ability to download ebooks bought from the Kindle store as files to your personal computer. This feature existed to support older Kindles that couldn't directly connect to the internet, so you'd need to download them and transfer the files manually in order to read them. Although not the intended purpose of the feature, a byproduct of it was that you could download a version of the book that you had bought, had paid money for, to keep as a backup. This would be a version that Amazon wouldn't be able to go and remotely remove from your device or amend it. And although breaking their terms, you could use the right software and be able to change that book so that you could read it on other e-readers and not just Amazon's proprietary Kindle devices. But that is no more, because the number of old Kindles must have dropped to a sufficiently low level that Amazon do not give a shit about the people who own them anymore and have now removed the download feature. I can't lie, before I saw this widely publicised here on BookTube and elsewhere, I had never thought to download my ebooks before, but rest assured, I went through and painstakingly downloaded every single one before the deadline, actually just like 20 minutes before the deadline. I absolutely hate the erosion of ownership of digital products, which is actually not an erosion of ownership, but more a transference of ownership, allowing companies to sell us goods and services while they maintain ownership of them. I recognise that this is a complicated topic and it's not as simple as DRM bad, because digital assets can be infinitely copied and piracy is a threat to author livelihoods. But in my opinion, shitty anti-consumer practices and predatory pricing also drives piracy and excludes people from participating in culture. The good news, however, is that the Kindle store now has some new competition, because goodguysbookshop.org now have started selling ebooks. You do currently have to read their books through an e-reading app on iOS or Android or via a web browser. So if you're happy to read on your phone or your iPad, or you've got an Android-based e-reading device, then you should be okay. They have said they are aiming to support Kobo devices later in the year, but have called out Amazon's proprietary DRM as a reason for not being able to read on Kindles, so it's not looking too likely for that to happen anytime soon. All that said, I think this is pretty cool. This is the final piece of the bookselling puzzle for bookshop.org, as they already offer print and audiobooks. And this might be the first time you're able to buy ebooks in a way that makes money for indie bookshops, although to be honest, I've not fact-checked that, so I could be wrong. I'll drop a link in the description if you want to find out more. Next, it's been announced that there will be another posthumous Harper Lee book released. This time it's a collection of unpublished short fiction and previously published non-fiction pieces from her, collected under the title The Land of Sweet Forever. The non-fiction side of things, putting that together in a single volume, fine, sure, but the unpublished short stories, to be honest, I think it's a bit tacky and a bit money-grabbing. This stuff was not published for a reason. Lee lived a very long life after To Kill a Mockingbird was published, and had she wanted these stories in the public eye, she could have easily made it happen. I'm sure she had plenty of offers, but she chose not to. She did not ever publish this stuff. I haven't read Go Set a Watchman, but from what I've heard, it was a pretty disastrous release and undid some of the magic of To Kill a Mockingbird. So I think, for me, it's just time to leave the lady alone. Like, just let her rest in peace. Let me know what you think of this. Like, should we be publishing works by dead authors who did not publish stuff in their lifetimes, and in some cases explicitly said they did not want things to be published? The final piece of news I wanted to touch on was that book banning in the US continues at pace and only seems to be getting more unhinged. One of the most recent instances involved a number of books at military family schools being placed on compliance review and pulled from shelves in the meantime. Books targeted included the scarily titled Freckle-Faced Strawberry by Oscar-winning actress Julianne Moore, which is about a girl with red hair and freckles who is apparently threatening to the fragile masculinity of the beta dweebs in the administration. And speaking of those beta dweebs, also on the ban list is Hillbilly Elegy by Vice President and full-time balloon face J.D. Vance. Hillbilly Elegy was pulled because it contains profanity, references to LGBTQ+ people, and passages celebrating diversity, apparently at odds with his boss's agenda. The fact that referencing LGBTQ+ people is enough to make a book targeted is absolutely infuriating, but Vance being caught in the crossfire does give this story a fun "I never thought leopards would eat my face" energy. I did consider making this the Feelgood story this month, but actually I don't want to see any books banned, even shitty ones written by people I despise. We'll move on to prize news now, and there is a lot of this, partly because I left this video so late, so more stuff happened right at the start of March, which I should cover. First up, some winners. So the Gordon Byrne Prize, which is that one that rewards works that challenge genre and interrogate the past. That was won by Ootlin by Jenny Fagan, about her experience growing up in care. If you recognise that title, it's because it's also on the long list for the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction. The Nero Book Awards also crowned its overall winner, which was a four-way battle between Wild Houses, Lost in the Garden, that children's book, which I've forgotten the name of, and Morris and Marilyn. And in the end, it was Sophie Elmhurst's non-fiction Morris and Marilyn that took home the prize. Next, let's talk long lists and shortlists, or what perhaps should be called the Miranda July section, because she had a bloody good week of nominations. But we will start with the prize that she is not eligible for. So the International Booker announced its long list of 13 books, or rather 12 novellas and Solenoid. The really interesting thing about this list is that all 13 authors are first-time nominees, although some of the translators have been previously nominated. I think this is looking like a really interesting list, and I'm actually just starting my 4th book from it, which is... which one am I reading? Small Boat by Vincent Delacroix, but I'll be talking about that one again later in the video because it's not out until the end of the month. I did a live reaction video to this list if you want a few more thoughts from me, and this was actually my first ever live reaction video. It didn't entirely go to plan, but it did end up being quite fun. And if you'd like to give that one a watch, I will link it down in the description. Next, the Women's Prize for Fiction long list of 16 books was announced. Given the huge field of great contenders, I was not expecting to do particularly well with my predictions, and I did only get 2 guesses right, which were The Safekeep and Nesting, but that was 100% improvement on my correct guesses from last year, so I'm going to chalk that up as a win. I'm absolutely fine with being wrong though, because there are plenty of really interesting surprises in the mix here. Speaking of surprises, I will briefly touch on the elephant in the room. So in my predictions video, I said that I would be quite surprised to see former winner Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie nominated because she has expressed some controversial views about trans women, which I disagree with, and I was indeed surprised when she was on the list. I personally don't plan on reading her book, and if you do want to read it, that's entirely up to you. But to be honest, I just don't want to give airtime to this issue, especially not in a video where I'm racing through lots of different topics. Plenty of other intelligent people have already chimed in on this though, and it's quite easy to look up if you want to know more. But for me, dwelling on this feels like it makes happen what I feared a nomination for Adichie would do. It just sucks the air out of the room and it dominates the narrative, and it takes away from what I'd prefer to be talking about, which is to celebrate what otherwise looks like a great list. And I have to say, in a year with so many fantastic options in the running, this is a long list that I think seems diverse and varied and fun. We've got authors from England, Scotland, Ireland, the Netherlands, Germany, Iran, Morocco, South Africa, New Zealand, and Nigeria. There is historical fiction in the mix, literary fiction, contemporary fiction, and there are multiple sci-fi books, which is really cool. There's also some cool crossover with some other prizes, including the Booker with The Safekeep and the Republic of Consciousness UK with Somewhere Else. Somehow, though, I completely missed Somewhere Else's nomination for the RSE because I had actually never heard of Jenny Daichi's book before it was announced as a Women's Prize nominee, and I was very happy of the surprise. Personally, I am just thrilled to see Amma on the list from small press Weatherglass Books, which I read and thoroughly enjoyed last year. Now that it has been nominated, it actually makes perfect sense for the prize. Sarai De Silva is a former writer for a New Zealand soap opera, and you can absolutely see that in the book because the constructions of the scenes are so good, they are so well honed, and the characters are all very well fleshed out. I am so happy that more people will read this book as a result of its nomination. There are 3 others that I've already read, so The Safekeep and All Fours, both of which I loved and gave 5 stars to, and Birding, which I am sad to say, in my opinion, is just not a very good book. But hey, on a list like this, there are bound to be a few that you don't enjoy. I am also currently listening to Fundamentally on audio and I am loving it, so it's looking like 4 out of the 5 are hits for me so far. As I've mentioned before, the turnaround between longlist and shortlist is very tight this year. We've got less than a month to go, as the 6 that make it will be announced on the 2nd of April. So if you want to read the books and guess what the shortlist is going to be, you're going to have to be pretty speedy. On the same day as the Women's Prize announcement came the Aussie equivalent, or rather the equivalent of both the fiction and non-fiction prizes mashed together because the Stella Prize announced its long list. I don't know tons about this list, but some of the nominees are ones that I've seen people talking about as Women's Prize contenders, including Theory and Practice by Michelle de Kretser, Rapture by Emily Maguire, and A Language of Limbs by Dylan Hardcastle. And if you still haven't had your fill of books written by women, the Carol Shields Prize for Women and Non-Binary Authors in the US and Canada announced its long list too, and it was another nomination for Miranda July and All Fours, along with Liars by Sarah Manguso, which I have read and thought was terrific, Booker nominee Rachel Kushner is on the list as well with Creation Lake, and River East, River West by Aubrey Lescure is also on the list, and you may recognise that one from last year's Women's Prize shortlist. Plus there are a bunch of other really interesting sounding titles, many of which are not available to me in the UK, but I'm sure if you are in the US, you may be able to get your hands on them. The Walter Scott Prize continues to make a challenge for being one of the best prizes going because it announced its long list as well, and it is an absolute corker. Some highlights include my favourite read of 2024, Glorious Exploits, another nomination for The Safekeep, a book to keep your eye on for this year's Booker, The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller, and Mother Naked by Glenn James Brown, which I am planning to read this month. Also announced were the British Book Awards shortlists. I'll be honest, I'm not too fussed by the British Book Awards, or as they're known, the Nibbies, because they seem much more marketing focused than reader focused or like based on literary merit, but they announced a slew of shortlists. The two most relevant for me are the debut fiction and fiction lists, both of which seem pretty strong, and of course includes yet another nomination for Woman of the Month, Miranda July. Finally, the Republic of Consciousness shortlists on both sides of the pond have been announced, but to be honest, they don't make it very easy to find out about them because their social media presence isn't very good and their website isn't very up to date. So I cannot remember which books made the cut. I have not made any notes of it, so you may just need to seek that out if that's a prize that you're interested in. A couple of dates for your diary to finish off then. On the 19th of March, the Climate Fiction shortlist is announced, and on the 20th of March, the Dylan Thomas shortlist is announced. Both of those prizes have really strong long lists, so it'll be fun to see which books make the cut. On the 25th of March, the Dublin Literary Award announces its shortlist. That's the one that had like 70 something books on its long list, so kind of impenetrable at that stage, but it'll be interesting to sort of get into that once the shortlist of 6 books is announced. And then on the 26th, the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction shortlist will be revealed. Let's now run through all of the notable new releases for the month of March. Obviously, we're like a third of the way through the month already, so some of these books have already been released, which, if you look at it another way, is quite exciting because if they pique your interest, you could go out and buy them right away or borrow them from your local library. As usual, this is based on the UK release date, and I'll run through them in chronological order. And we're going to start with The Dream Hotel by Leila Lalami. This is a speculative fiction about technology that can predict if someone is about to commit a crime based on their dreams. It sounds like a modern update to The Minority Report, and I had pre-ordered this in the Waterstones pre-order sale they did where you got like 25% off, which paid off because it has now been nominated for the Women's Prize, and I'm very excited to read it. Then on the 6th of March was the release of Hunchback by Sao Ichikawa, translated from Japanese by Polly Barton. This is about a wealthy disabled woman who writes, among many things, sexy fiction under a pseudonym on the internet until one of her carers discovers her secret online persona and she makes him an offer. I read this one recently, and although it is very, very short, I thought it was great and fun and powerful, and I am looking forward to reviewing it. Also out on the 6th is Twist by Colin McCann. This is a seafaring adventure about a ship's captain who disappears and a writer who tries to track him down. I have another of McCann's book, Aparogon, which I still want to read and need to get to. So I probably won't be reading Twist before I get to that. I'm trying to institute a new book buying rule in my life where I don't buy another book by an author if I already have a book of theirs sitting unread on my shelves, but let's see how that goes. And another book out on the same day is Flesh by David Soleil. This one's about a 15-year-old Hungarian boy who has a clandestine relationship with an older woman and then ends up ascending the ranks of the super rich. It's been getting great reviews from what I've seen, so I am intrigued by this. And finally, on the 6th is the release of Sleeping Children by Anthony Passeron, translated from French by Frank Wynne. Here, a family in southern France deals with the dual crises of the AIDS epidemic and a heroin addiction, and it sounds, from what I've been seeing online, like a very emotionally powerful and quite depressing read, so perhaps very much up my street. Then on the 13th of March, there is an absolute flood of new releases. There are so many, and I'm going to try and run through all of the ones that stood out to me. First up is Elegy Southwest by Madeline Watts. This is a climate-focused road trip novel about a couple travelling through the American Southwest and noticing lots of changes in the environment, but also seeing their relationship change and develop. The Unworthy by Agustina Bazterrica, translated from Spanish by Sarah Moses. I don't really know how to sum this one up succinctly based on what I've read, but it's a dystopian novel revolving around a woman who is part of a creepy religious convent, and she's writing journal entries from the cell she's been confined to because she is unworthy. The cover absolutely freaks me out, but I'm sure Baz Tariqa fans, people who love Tender is the Flesh, are going to just eat this one up. Then we have The Antidote by Karen Russell. This is a long-awaited new novel from Russell, who I believe has only released short story collections since she was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for Swamplandia in 2011. This is set in the American Dust Bowl about a woman who can take on your memories and keep them safe. That is, until a storm wipes away all of the memories that she has saved. Also out on that day is Stag Dance by Tori Peters. I actually don't know too much about this beyond its excellent cover and the fact that it is a novella and a bunch of short stories, but I've been hearing really good things about it, that it's funny and unsettling and just an enjoyable romp that also deals with some pretty challenging topics. It's got to be in the running for like cover of the year, surely. I mean, look at that. We are still on the 13th of March though. We are not done yet. And we are also not done with just fantastic books, because also out is A Room Above a Shop by Anthony Shapland. This is about the tentative love between two men in 1980s Wales. I read this right at the beginning of the year, and it is a definite contender for my favourite reads of the year. It's absolutely stunning. And if you want to hear more of my thoughts on this one, it was part of my like 5 books in 5 days vlog that I posted very early in January, so I'll link to that down in the description. Natasha Brown's new book, Universality, is also out on that day. This one starts with a man bludgeoned with a gold bullion bar, hence the cover art. And after having read and loved Natasha Brown's debut, Assembly, that's all I really need to know. I am definitely in. And our final book for the 13th of March is Colony by Annika Norlin, which is translated, I believe, from Swedish by Alice E. Olsen. This is a book that I had included in my International Booker predictions and subsequently got myself very excited about, and so also pre-ordered this. It's about a woman who escapes the hustle and bustle of city life and then finds herself part of a colony of outsiders. I think it sounds like a lot of fun. Moving then towards the end of the month, on the 20th of March is the release of I Want to Go Home But I'm Already There by Roisin Lanigan. This is a horror story for the rental generation as a couple move into a flat in an affluent neighbourhood, but something doesn't seem quite right. I had only just heard of this one recently, but it sounds like lots of fun and a great social satire. Also out on the 20th is Luminous by Sylvia Park. This is a literary sci-fi novel set in a reunified Korea where robots are part of everyday life and 2 human children have a 3rd sibling who is a robot until he mysteriously disappears. On the 24th of March is the release of my current read, which is Small Boat by Vincent Delacroix, translated from French by Helen Stevenson. This is one from the International Booker Prize longlist, and it tackles a fictionalised version of a real-life tragedy in the English Channel where a small boat carrying migrants sank. It takes the interesting perspective not of the migrants, but of one of the Coast Guard who is held as being responsible for the tragedy. I'm about halfway through and really enjoying it so far, very interested to see where it goes. Our last release date of the month is the 27th, but I've got 4 books to mention for that day. First up is Rapture by Emily Maguire, which I mentioned earlier as being a nominee for the Stella Prize. This is a historical novel set in the Holy Roman Empire in the 9th century about a woman who disguises herself as a man and ends up working in a renowned monastery. Another Stella Prize nominee out on the same day is A Language of Limbs by Dylan Hardcastle. This is a queer love story that starts in the early 1970s and follows 2 girls as they grow into women, their paths continue to cross, and they experience growing acceptance of LGBT people, but also the crises that befall them. Greater Sins by Gabrielle Griffiths is also coming out. It's set in the early 20th century in Scotland, where a perfectly preserved body is found in a peat bog, and with its discovery comes some strange happenings. This sounds eerie and exciting, and I've pre-ordered it. The final release I'm going to mention is Beautyland by Marie-Helene Bertino. This came out in the US last year and is finally coming to the UK. I think it's about an alien that has to report back to her home planet how weird humans are. And let's face it, we are really weird, so this sounds like a lot of fun. Moving on to books on screen, which I'm going to keep pretty brief, partly because my camera is running out of battery, but just 3 to mention. One is Mickey 17, which is based on the book Mickey 7, directed by Bong Joon-ho, who has previously directed Snowpiercer and Oscar Best Picture winner Parasite. I saw this at the weekend and thought it was so much fun. It's wacky, it's tonally all over the place in a way that I really enjoyed, and it has a very, very good cast. Robert Pattinson, I think, is great in the lead role, or in like the dual lead roles of Mickey 17 and Mickey 18. Critics also liked it with a score of 79% on Rotten Tomatoes. Roro Reads has just done a review of the book, which from his review it sounds like he enjoyed, but I'm taking from it that the film is probably better. I will link to that video in the description if you want to hear Roro's thoughts. The Monkey is a horror based on a Stephen King short story about one of those toys where the monkey like bangs the cymbal, except this one is cursed. That's had some good reviews too, also receiving 79% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, but it has a slightly more mixed audience reaction. And finally, Hot Milk is a film adaptation of Deborah Levy's novel about a mother and daughter who travel to a clinic in Spain to try and find a cure for the daughter's paralysis. It stars Emma Mackey and Fiona Shaw. This hasn't had much love from critics and has a Rotten Tomatoes score of just 38%. Finishing off with this month's feel-good story, this one is about George Saunders' Substack, which is mainly targeted at people who want to write short stories, and he breaks down short works that he loves and the techniques that they use. I think it's along the same lines as his book A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. In a recent newsletter though, he expressed his sorrow at the passing of author Joy Williams, who he greatly admired. So far, not so feel good, I know. But the thing is, Joy Williams did not die. She is 81 years old and she is still going strong. Saunders issued a correction very soon after that first newsletter went out, and he later said that he got the sweetest, funniest message from Joy Williams in response to his idiotic mistake. And I think the feel-good aspect of this is that it's nice to have an opportunity to celebrate the fact that Joy Williams is still alive. Isn't that lovely? That's all for book news this month. Please do let me know in the comments if you had any thoughts about any of the stories that were featured, any of the new releases coming out, or any of the prize lists that you are particularly excited for. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit like because it really helps the channel out. And if you'd like to see more from me, then hit subscribe and I release a new video about once a week. But until next time, toodles.